and welcome to games 80 to 71 in my top 100 Spectrum games countdown. My number 80 game is Bomb Jack. Yeah, I know, some people are thinking, what, 80? That's far too low. And I see what you mean, and I probably, in the heart of my heart of hearts, know that you were right. So why on earth, I bet you're asking, is Bomb Jack number 80? Well, the reason is that I am a huge fan of the Bomb Jack arcade game. I really love the Bomb Jack arcade game. I've liked it from the first moment I played it. From memory, I think sometime in the 80s, one of those travelling fairs came to where I live, and it's set up on the village green, and you went down there and there was an arcade, and it had loads of machines, and I would have had a few 10 pences, probably only 30 or 40 pence by the time I'd gone on things like the Waltzer and other fairground rides, and I had a few 10p's left to spend. I'll have probably played games like Space Invaders and Galaxian. If I could have found a Galaxian machine, I would definitely have played Galaxian. I really loved playing Galaxian, even though I was absolutely rubbish at it. But anyway, I think in that arcade there would have been a Bomb Jack machine, and I put my 10p in, and to be honest with you, Space Invaders back then I'd have lasted less than the screen. In fact, what I used to do is just stay at one side of the screen, shoot them all, and they'd actually land at the other side of the screen, but I'd never go over there because I was too scared because they were too low down. Galaxians I might have got off the first screen if I was lucky, but I never did anything like shoot the convoy, so I never got a very high score. And I played Bomb Jack, and I went through the first screen and I'd finished the screen, and the next screen and I'd finished the screen, and of course I didn't know about the sparkling bombs, so I wasn't getting big bonuses, I wasn't getting a huge amount, but here was a game I could play, and I loved it. I went back to it and back to it. Every time I could find a Bomb Jack machine after then, I would play Bomb Jack, and I learned about the sparkling bombs. I remember seeing someone really good playing it before me while I was waiting in a queue to play it. One of those big kids, remember those big kids in arcades that seemed to be absolutely fantastic at the games? And he was getting these really big bonuses, and I realised what he was doing is he'd learned the pattern and was getting the sparkling bombs. So I decided to do that. I decided to learn the pattern. I can't remember how much later it was that Bomb Jack came out for the Spectrum, but I bought it and I played it, and I always felt a little bit let down. I mean, we all know that it is a fantastic conversion. It's quite probably the best arcade conversion on the Spectrum. However, for me, it just wasn't the same as the arcade game. Now, what it did, I will freely admit that I played it a lot, I played it tons, and it helped me learn those bomb patterns, those sparkling bomb patterns. I knew the first 4 or 5 screens, but the ones after that, actually, it was the Spectrum game that let me learn those bomb patterns. So it was good for that, and of course it was a Commodore beta as well. The Spectrum version of Bomb Jack was so much better than the Commodore 64 version. And in those playground arguments, although there weren't many playground arguments in my school because everybody had a Spectrum and nobody had a Commodore 64. There were 1 or 2 kids who had a Commodore 64, but they were so in the minority, I think they just kept their heads down and the gob shut. But yeah, it's a brilliant game. Yes, it is a fantastic arcade conversion, but for me, it just isn't as good as the arcade game, and I love the arcade game so much that I've put it down at number 80. And I know that in my heart of hearts, a lot of you will think it should be higher, and that's great, because it is a fantastic game, I agree. But for me, it's in number 80. So that's my number 80, Bomb Jack. My number 79 game is Saboteur. Oh, I know, it's another one, isn't it? People are thinking, hold on, Bomb Jack 80, Saboteur 79, this guy's gone crazy. Somebody recently wrote, I think it was on YouTube, a comment saying Saboteur would be their number 1. And that's great, it is another great game, and yes, I can see why some people love it. I just don't think it's that high up in my list. I've said a few times in these lists that what is the deciding factor for me is how long I spend playing the game. So games that I spent ages and ages playing are higher up in the list than games that I didn't spend so long playing. That's how, when I was putting this list together, that was my deciding factor. And to be honest with you, I didn't spend a lot of time playing Saboteur. I know people love it. I know it is a really good game. It was released by Jarrell Software. Jarrell consistently released good quality software. Nothing was ever my absolute favourite. I mean, they weren't for me as good as, say, the Ultimate games. Ultimate were superb quality. Not quite at the end. Things waned a bit, but no, Ultimate was superb quality. Whereas Jarrell was sufficient quality. It was good enough. It was always a decent game. With some brilliant Jarrell games. Harrier Attack, Scuba Dive, which I've already mentioned in this list. So no, it was fantastic. And Saboteur was released in 1985, which, given how good the graphics look, was quite early on in the Spectrum's life. So again, I can see why for some people this game had a huge impact. They looked at it and thought, wow, that looks amazing. Look at the size of those sprites, look at how smoothly they move. I'm a ninja infiltrating a base, I can pick up all these things, I can throw shuriken, it's fantastic, and I see why. However, I just feel it's a little lacking in gameplay. The gameplay itself is pretty simplistic. I mean, what can you do? You can run around, you can pick things up and throw them at God. I never got on with the dogs. In fact, to this day, I don't think I've ever managed to get rid of a dog in Saboteur, actually be able to stop it from biting me. I just used to jump over them and try and avoid them and run past them. And I quite like the bit where you go through one bit of maze and then you jump into the monorail car thing, underground monorail, the kind of underground car thing, and you go to the next bit of map and you negotiate that and you go to the next bit of map. And the whole looking through computer terminals and searching for things, that's good. Very reminiscent of Mission Impossible for the Commodore. And I think, was Mission Impossible ever released for the Spectrum? If anyone knows, please feel free to let me know. But despite all that, I like the game. And what you've got to remember is that actually being number 79 on this list isn't necessarily a bad thing, because there were so many fantastic games for the Spectrum. I think any game that's on this list is a fantastic game. I've got some honourable mentions, and I was looking at them the other day, the games that won't make this list, and there are some great games in that. I'm going to do an honourable mention list after I've finished the top 100. But there's not much to say about it, and that's the thing. I think that's the reason why it's down there. When I think about this game, yeah, I got it, I played it a bit, it was okay. I can see the impact the graphics had, as I said. I think it was a crash smash, I'm pretty sure it was a crash smash. Never played the sequel. I think the sequel was supposed to be quite good as well, very similar graphics. But yeah, it never really caught me. It's never one of those games that really caught my imagination, but I can see how it would in others now, how it would be higher in their list. So that's my number 79 game, Saboteur. My number 78 game is Albatrosity. Now this game's something of a first in this list, in that it's the first modern homebrew game that I've included within the list. Albatrosity was written by Jonathan Caldwell, who almost single-handedly has contributed a huge amount to kind of the post-commercial Spectrum software scene. This game was released in 2008, so as you can see, I mean, it's actually a pretty modern game, and it's a brilliant game. As with some other games in this list, I have talked about this elsewhere and reviewed it elsewhere, so I'm not going to go into the gameplay a lot. It's a very, very simple overview. It's a golf game, as you would expect for something called Albatrosity, and it's a side-on golf game. And I was thinking about this earlier, and I can't think of any other side-on golf games. Golf games tend to either be top-down or they are 3D. And I'm quite a fan of golf games. I really like them. I love Everybody's Golf on the PlayStation Portable. I play that quite a lot on the PlayStation Portable. It's one of my go-to games. Actually, in 1993, Jonathan Caldwell released another sports game called Crazy Golf, and you can kind of see some of the embryos of Albatrosity in that. That is a top-down golf game, but you have some fiendishly difficult screens within that. In fact, anyone who does go and have a look at that, I'd highly recommend Albatrosity, by the way. Please go, download it, have a go on it. On World of Spectrum site, it says distribution denied because it's still available from Chronosoft. And I think that's true. Where I've got it, where I've got the commercial release, was on my iPhone. I actually got the Spectaculator package on the iPhone, and this came with that. And this is actually my go-to game on the iPhone. It's well worth seeking out on that platform and playing. I really like this. This is one of those games that has simple controls, so it actually maps really well. It's not a Twitch game. You don't really need quick reaction to it, or not very often. So while it says distributed denied, there is a demo version, and the demo version does differ from the commercial version. The way that the balls work is slightly different. You get 3 types of balls in the game. You get standard rubber balls, which you tend to get quite a few of, and they're quite bouncy. You get steel balls, which aren't as bouncy, and sticky balls, which basically stop when they stick onto something, when they hit a surface. And basically, in every screen, you get a set amount of them, and you've got to get the ball in the hole, as per golf. Now, the use of the sticky and the steel balls actually adds quite a strategic dimension to the game. I mean, golf is slightly strategic anyway, I think, in how you play the games, how you pitch onto greens and things like that, I guess. But the use of those balls really does make a difference, and when to use them and when to choose them becomes quite a skill within this game. I have actually completed a complete walkthrough of this game as well, so I'll probably do a commentary for that at some point in the future and give a few tips on it. One of the things I would say is later on some of the screens become fiendishly difficult. So if you're going to play this, you find the first few screens are quite easy, you can get through them easily. And it's got a good difficulty curve. It's one of those games with a really, really good difficulty curve. But it's highly recommended, as are any of Jonathan Caldwell's games. Please go onto the World of Spectrum, have a look, see what he's done. I think he's done something like 40 games on there. Certainly quite a few, and a lot of those are really, really good. Even the ones that are low rated. As I said, Crazy Golf's on there, and I don't think it's that highly rated, but it's still worth picking out. The difficulty curve on that does ramp up really, really quickly. There's a ramp in the third screen, which is quite difficult to get past. But anyway, that's my number 78 game, Albatrosity. My number 77 game is War in Middle-earth. War in Middle-earth was released in 1989 by Melbourne House Software, and it was written by Maelstrom Games. Maelstrom Games was the software development company or games development company set up by Mike Singleton post Beyond. I think he also released Dark Scepter through that, and this game for me is quite similar to Dark Scepter. I didn't play Dark Scepter a lot, but I don't think it quite lived up to the promise of Mike Singleton's earlier games. In particular, I don't think it quite lived up to the promise of Lords of Midnight. I remember I bought this. This was the last Spectrum game I ever bought, actually, and I bought this pretty much as soon as it came out. And I remember rushing home and loading it up and Mike Singleton's name being on the loading screen. And I reviewed this game for the Spectrum Bible, which is a series of reviews where it's reviews by fans of the Spectrum that were published by Lulu Books, and you can still go there and buy it now. And I'd encourage people to do that, by the way. They're great books. But back to the game, yeah, I loaded it up and had Mike Singleton's name on the loading screen. And what I said in the review in the Spectrum Bible was, what I wanted then and what I still want now is Lords of Midnight set in Middle-earth. And in fact, I think you could almost do it with the Lords of Midnight engine. If you just change the Lords of Midnight to engine so that where all the baddies are actually becomes Moria, and all of the rest of the citadels and keeps where the free are becomes places like Minas Tirith and Lothlorien and Rivendell and the Lonely Mountain, etc., etc. You could just make a game where, in the same way as the Lords of Midnight, the Foul of Doomdark just march over Midnight, the orcs and things from Isengard and from Mordor could march over Middle-earth, and it could be a very, very similar game. You even have two ways to complete the quest. I guess you'd have to capture Isengard and Dol Guldur, and the other way to do it would be to get the ring to Mount Doom and destroy it, which is very similar to getting the Ice Crown to somewhere and destroying that. But enough of that, enough of what I wanted, and let's actually have a look at this game. So the gameplay in this game is actually quite good. Once I got it and played it, and had played it a few times, I really got into this game. I've never completed it, I'll say that now. There are various reasons for that. One is, I mean, the Lords of Midnight to play takes a long, long time. You have to save games and come back to it, and playing the Lords of Midnight can take an incredibly large amount of time. That amount of time dwarfs in comparison to playing War in Middle-earth. It does really take an incredibly large amount of time. So there are three views within the game. There is the overall map of Middle-earth, which uses the bright function actually on the Spectrum really well to show you where your armies are. There's a more zoomed in where you see individual armies and mountains and individual features which is on a grid, and you can use that to select your armies and your people and move them around the map and give them instructions. They can go to somewhere, they can follow someone, you can move everyone as a stack in a location, or you can move individuals in a location. And then the final view is a kind of isometric view whenever there's a battle. And to fight a battle, basically you get this isometric view and you move your troops around to fight whatever's coming to kill you, be it the Black Riders or the Orcs. Now, one thing I will say, I'll start with the battle view. That isometric view I mentioned. One thing that really gets my goat about this game is there's no AI for the heroes. There's no AI for your troops. So when you see a battle, you can have one guy surrounded by 40 orcs and 10 of his mates standing really, really close by doing nothing about it. Now, I'm pretty sure within an army that's not really the done thing. Surely the troops should rush to the raids of their comrades, and I think that's one of the things that's lacking in the game, but it's still a good game, and I mean, still still quite high up on my list, and I did spend a lot of time playing this, don't get me wrong, but it isn't quite as good as Lords of Midnight, and that's one of the criticisms I'll throw at it. What I do like about this game is it had early signs of some of the later games that Mike Singleton did, where you'd set someone to go somewhere, and instead of you having to move the character or the army every single step, the computer did it for you. You'd set something to go somewhere and just start time, and they would get on it, do it. I know that in the PC Lords of Midnight game, the Citadel, that's how it worked. I have a feeling that's how things worked in Midwinter as well, although I've never played the Midwinter games, and I'm sure if somebody knows, they could correct me. The game is an early point-and-click game, and back then I'd never seen a Windows interface. I'd never seen the Apple OS that had the kind of point-and-click mouse-driven interface. This has that. It also has clicking and double-clicking. To select something, you click once, and double-clicking actually then brings up a menu of what to do, which is quite a good game mechanic. The game is a little bit slow, and when I play this game in an emulator, I tend to play with the emulator speed cranked up a bit, but that makes the control a bit difficult, so it's roundabouts and swings. If you can't be bothered to do the battles, and you put yourself at a disadvantage for this, every time there's a battle you could just crank the speed up really, really quickly and the battle's over within seconds. That's not really a very good thing to do though, because you will lose more troops, because of that reason I said earlier, that the troops that aren't engaged in battle will just stand by and do absolutely nothing while their comrades fight off a whole host of orcs. I wouldn't want to be in one of those armies, and if I was, I think I'd hang back a little. And I don't think there's much more to say about this game than that. I mean, anyone who has listened to my top 10 will know that I'm a huge fan of the Lords of Midnight. I'm a huge fan of Mike Singleton. His passing recently, I can't remember when it was, but it was within the last few years, was very, very sad. I'm sorry to have seen him go. He made some terrific games, and this was a very, very good one, just not the pinnacle, not his best, but his best was so high that would be hard to say. It's difficult to beat a Mike Singleton game. That's my number 77 game, War in Middle-earth. My number 76 game is Pentagram. Pentagram was released in 1986 by Ultimate Play the Game, and was the last Saberman game to be released on the Spectrum. There was, of course, the famous Maya Mare that was advertised and reportedly either not written at all, or written a little bit of, or I think somewhere there's an interview that is almost certainly false that says it was completely written and someone had played it. But whatever the truth of Maya Mare, I've really given up hope of ever actually seeing Maya Mare and being able to play it. There is a fan fiction Maya Mare called Land of Maya Mare that someone has released, which is worth finding. It's quite a good little game. But enough of the myths about Maya Mare. Pentagram was an Ultimate Play the Game, but I think it was post the buyout of Ultimate by US Gold. So around about 1986, US Gold actually bought the rights to Ultimate and the full back catalogue. It was subsequently bought back by Rare, by the way, so I think those rights were then bought back. And again, this is rumour and things that you read on the internet and things that were in the press at the time, but it was rumoured that US Gold and Ultimate Play the Game ACG fell out a bit over the rights, because US Gold were just re-releasing the earlier Ultimate titles as budget software, and Tim and Chris Stamper I don't think were particularly keen on that. Now, from memory, there was a contract that Ultimate would supply a few more games to US Gold to release, and Pentagram was one of them. And some people say that the reason Pentagram isn't really quite up to the standards of some of the previous Ultimate games was because it was just rushed out to fulfill this contract. And of course, at that time, the Stampers and Ultimate Play the Game were moving into the NES and became Rare. And I have to mention Rare Replay at this point. Rare Replay is available on the Xbox One by Rare and has a load of the old Spectrum games on it, a load of the old Ultimate Play the Game games. I pre-ordered it, I had it and played it the day it came out and absolutely loved it. I'm really enjoying playing those old Spectrum games again. Strangely enough, I can play them emulated. I have a load of ways of playing them, and yeah, it's fantastic just to play them on an Xbox, on a modern console. I'm enjoying getting the stamps and things like that. I've completed Attic Attack, Saber Wolf, Nightlaw, Gunfright as well, which is a good game. But anyway, back to Pentagram. Enough of that, enough of the kind of history of Ultimate Play the Game. So yeah, this was the last fast Saberman game, and it is very, very similar to Nightlore. The story is that post Nightlore, Saberman learned some magic off the wizard that had helped him out in Nightlore, and now is trying to restore the Pentagram. Now, I bought this game pretty much as soon as it came out, and I still have the cassette box. I don't have the cassette. One day, if I see one on eBay going for a reasonable price, I may buy a Pentagram off eBay. But I did have this game. I did have the cassette, and it is a brilliant game. I'm not quite sure where the cassette's gone, because I do think I made a backup of it on an emulator, the same as I did. I have the Ultimate Collection as well, and I know that one of the first things I did is load them into one of the early Spectrum emulators and get them all backed up so I could keep playing. But anyway, yep, I don't know where my tape of Pentagram's gone. It should be knocking around somewhere. And I bought this and I brought it up and I loaded it up. And actually, I played it loads. I've said a few times that one of the criteria I have for these games and how high up they come in the list is how much I played them. I started playing this game and I played it and played it and played it. And I could not for the life of me figure out what on earth you needed to do. The instructions in Ultimate games were always pretty vague. They'd normally consist of just some obscure rhyme, and you'd have to figure it out from there on yourself. I think one of the problems I had with Pentagram is, even with the rhyme, I didn't have a clue what to do. I mapped the complete game, I went round it, and I could get to every single screen pretty much with no problem, and I still couldn't figure out what to do. I think in the game, if you shoot the wells, something happens. And having a quick look on Tip Shop, there's nothing actually there to tell you how to complete the game either. The map's really, really big. One difference over Nightlore is, as well as picking up and using objects, Saberman can shoot. He can fire a magic ball, which is very similar to the magic ball that the wizard can shoot in Attic Attack. One big difference is there aren't as many objects in this game, and in these isometric games the objects were always useful. In particular, the ability to pick up and jump at the same time was always useful for getting over gaps and things like that. Now, this game doesn't have that, and it does have that, but what it doesn't have is lots and lots of objects lying around, like, say, Nightlore or Alien 8, that will let you do this. So navigation of the map can be really, really tricky. But as I said, I never actually worked out how you completed this game. Well, I did have a lot of fun playing it. It's not as good. I mean, by 1986, there were tons and tons and tons of isometric games available on the Spectrum. That novelty of them had started to wane, and this didn't really add anything above Nightlore or Alien 8. And certainly games like Batman and Head Over Heels, for example, and possibly Sweevo's World and Hydrofoil, which I've never played, possibly they were better games as well. So yeah, it's a bit of a flawed classic. It does come into this list mainly because of the amount of time I took playing it. And when I play it now, you can see it's still got a bit of that ultimate polish. The graphics are still really, really good. I particularly like the forest areas. I think the graphics in the forest areas look good, and if they'd been like that in Nightlore, I think they would have fitted in really, really well. So it does get into my list. It gets into my list because, yeah, it was a game I really, really liked. I drew a whole map myself before one was ever available in magazines like Crash, and I did spend a lot of time playing it, but never quite figured it out. And never, because of the reasons I've said, the lack of knowing what to do, it being so obscure as to almost be impossible to work out, and the lack of objects that can just help you in the game, making some games incredibly difficult. Some games you start and you find yourself almost trapped and just can't work out what to do because you can't find an object. So that's my number 76 game, Pentagram. My number 75 game is Shadowfire. Shadowfire was released in 1985 by Beyond Software, and Beyond Software seemed to have this knack of doing epic games. Their games were always kind of big and always had a big backstory. They did of course charge $9.95 for the privilege of having a big game with a big backstory, but I used to really like Beyond games. They didn't release a huge amount of games, but they always seemed to be good games. I think I said earlier in this video that Jarell always released games that were of an acceptable standard. I think Beyond went a little bit beyond that. Those big cardboard boxes that these games came in looked really, really good, but were easily damaged. I know my original Lords of Midnight box disintegrated a while ago. And that kind of brings me on to how I bought Shadowfire. So Shadowfire I bought in a bargain bin, and the box was absolutely battered to pretty much an unacceptable state for a game of $9.95, and I think that's why it was in the bargain bin. I can't remember how much I paid, but I think it might have been $1.99 I paid for Shadowfire, and it was probably an ex-display copy. I'd seen reviews of the game. I hadn't played it when it originally came out. It'll have been at least a few months after it came out, but I had seen reviews of it and seen that it was a good game. I think it may have been a crash smash. Yeah, in fact, I'm pretty sure it was a crash smash. And I saw it was cheap, so I got it. And I got it home and I read the manual. And this was back in the days when you really had to read the manual. Going back to it now, when I went back to it now to play some games for the video for this, I didn't have a clue what to do. I actually had to go and read a bit online and read the manual on the World of Spectrum website before I could figure out what on earth I was doing. So I read the manual and I had a backstory, and earlier in this video I said that Saboteur wasn't a game for me. I don't think it caught my imagination like it did some of the people who rate Saboteur really highly, but Shadowfire really caught my imagination. I really was the leader of that team. Those characters in the Shadowfire team were real for me. I was playing those characters and they all had their own personalities and the way they acted. My favourite is the big battle droid, Maul. He's incredibly slow. It takes him ages to get anywhere. What you'll often find when playing the game is that some of your other characters get caught up in combat and Maul's slow to the party, arrive last, and then just wipes everybody out. Wipes all the enemies out, no problem at all. And he's a bit of a strange character, Maul, because he appears to be a levitating sphere. Now, I don't know about you, but in all the science fiction I've ever seen, levitating spheres tend to move quite quickly, but Maul doesn't. Also, he can use exactly the same guns that all the humans can use. And this is a combat droid that has no arms or, to be honest with you, anything outside what appears to be a sphere. Now, I'm not quite sure how he pulls the trigger on these guns, but he is very effective with them when he does. So this was another kind of point-and-click interface game, very strategic game. And it's kind of reminiscent of real-time strategies in that what you do is you can set a character moving and they do it in real time. So the clock is constantly counting down in this game. I think you have an hour to complete your mission. You have to rescue some ambassador who's got himself caught and take over the ship and either kill or capture the baddie guy who's some evil general. Now the whole game is icon driven, and if you're going back to it now, as I say, I didn't have a clue what to do. You really need to read the manual because the icons aren't particularly intuitive. But in a nutshell, you have three things you can do. You can either move, enter combat, or manage objects. So one of the icon is the pick up, drop, equip objects icon. The other icon is the movement icon, and then finally there's the combat icon, which just says yes, I want to attack in that direction. You've got to beam down to the ship as well. To start with, Mantle, your teleport droid, needs to get everyone down onto the ship. I think if you want to, you can kind of do a pincer movement and you can drop different members of the team into different areas of the ship. I always found that having everyone together, keeping everyone together, was by far the best thing to do. 2 or 3 people in combat together is much more effective than just 1 or 2. And as I say, Maul will turn up and save everybody's bacon at the end of the day anyway. So yeah, you have to teleport everyone down, find your way around the ship, find the ambassador, find the prisoner, rescue all of them, and I think either get off the ship. You can capture the ship by defeating everybody on the entire ship. If I have one criticism of this game, and probably the reason why it's so far down this list, it's that it's a bit easy. That means that criteria I'm using for where things go in the list, how much time I've spent playing them. This game actually, I didn't spend a huge amount of time playing it. It didn't take me long to complete it. And once I had completed it, I didn't see much point in going back to it again. It doesn't have a lot of replay value once you've completed it. It actually becomes quite easy. Even though it still did catch my imagination, and for the time I was playing it, I really was immersed in the game. So while yeah, it's a brilliant game, it caught my imagination, I think the ease and lack of replay value really does limit the game. Still one that I'd recommend that people go and check out. If you've never played it before, you really need to read the manual. Probably a good thing to do would be to watch a walkthrough. I might do a walkthrough with a commentary myself of this game at some point in the future. It wasn't one that was on my list, but I think I might add it to my list now. But other than that, it's a really, really good game and a nice interface. It's interesting to see how interfaces have evolved. And as I said, very reminiscent of real-time strategies. If you like things like Command & Conquer and Warcraft, then I think this game could capture your imagination and might be one that you like playing. As long as you're willing to remember that it was on a ZX Spectrum with only 48k of memory and about a 1 kHz Z80 processor, so not very powerful. And I'd recommend people go back and play it. That's my number 75 game, Shadowfire. My number 74 game is Lotus Esprit. Turbo Esprit was released in 1986 by Jarrell. Another one of those good, perfectly acceptable Jarrell games. Before I get into the game, one thing I will say is that I didn't have a clue how you pronounced Esprit before doing this. I thought it was Esprit, but I didn't know whether it was a sprint, a spirit, or what. So I went and found a video on YouTube of Richard Hammond test driving one and waited ages for him to say the name of the car. I think he might not have been sure as well, because he just kept referring to it as a Lotus. So if you go on YouTube and want to know how to pronounce this car's name, and you see a video with Richard Hammond test driving one, he'll call it a Lotus up until about halfway through the video. Anyway, one thing I did learn from that video is these are incredibly desirable cars. But anyway, enough about that, enough about Richard Hammond, enough about the car and how you pronounce Esprit. Let's get into the game itself. One of the things I've always thought about the Spectrum is that it never really had enough power to do 3D races. I'm a big fan of racing games. There are a few racing games in this list, but to be honest with you, the Spectrum never really could do a 3D racing game. Things like Pole Position just didn't cut the mustard. Checkered Flag, I remember. I bought Checkered Flag early on in my Spectrum gaming career, and it was okay. I played it a few times, but to be honest with you, it wasn't particularly good. And I actually think when it comes to 3D driving experiences on the Spectrum, this game is probably by far the best. It does have a little bit of a feeling of a tech demo with a game tagged on, but it is such an amazing tech demo that you can forgive it that. Basically, you take a view from behind the car and you race around the streets of one of 4 cities trying to stop a drug deal from going on. Now, like some other games, School Days springs to mind, actually playing the game isn't the main thing you want to do with this game. Completing the game isn't something that I ever concentrated on. I try a few times just to give me something to do. But to be honest with you, just racing around the streets causing madness and mayhem is so much fun that playing the game and trying to complete it properly just pales into insignificance. And in fact, whenever I did try and complete the game, I think what you're supposed to do is let the drug deal take place and then capture the getaway car as it flies off with the drugs. Now, while that sounds very well and good and what you should be doing, it's actually really, really difficult. What's more fun is just driving around the game trying not to die, going as fast as you can. And the main fun in this game is when you turn corners. Now, there's 2 ways to do that. You can either do it nice and slowly, where you turn corners as you would in your driving lesson. Hands at 2 o'clock and 10 o'clock, feeding the steering wheel through your hands without crossing them. You know, the way that you drive up until you pass your driving test, and then that just goes out the window and you start crossing them pretty much immediately. Or you can race really, really fast and do kind of a handbrake 90-degree turn, which is a lot less accurate but a lot more fun. And one of the fun things I really used to like in this game is going from the big 3-lane road to a 1-lane, one-way street, which is the narrowest street you can get in the game, and trying to do one of those 90-degree handbrake turns into those streets. If you are going at full speed and you get it wrong, your car explodes as you hit the wall. If you're going at full speed and get it right, you get an amazing adrenaline rush and go, yes, let's do that again. And of course, when you try and do it again, you will hit the wall and your car will explode. There are 2 mechanics in this game for scoring as well. You have a positive score and a negative score. And as you drive around the city, there are a lot of other things in this city. It's a fully populated city. There are people walking along the pavement. I think in some cases there are people up ladders on the pavement. There are other cars which are a bit boring and just seem to get in your way. They can be shot. However, if you're going at full speed and you shoot a car, you actually drive into the explosion and explode yourself. So while that isn't much fun, it is something to watch out for. But you can, if you really, really want to, and I don't condone this, drive along the pavements and just knock loads of people over, racking up your negative score no end. But like I say, at the end of the day, the reason why this is so low down is really it is a tech demo with a bit of gameplay tagged on the end. That's my number 74 game, Turbo Esprit. My number 73 game is Dominatrix. Now, some of you, in fact most of you, have probably never even heard of this game, and even if you search on the internet you can't find a lot of information on it. And by the way, if you're googling Dominatrix, be really, really careful of your spelling and what autocomplete can put in there. You might end up at a website that you don't really want to be at. This is another one of those modern titles, so it was released in 2005 and written by a guy named Bob Smith, and as I say, there isn't really a lot on the internet about this. This is also a title that I've already reviewed elsewhere, so I'm not going to say a lot about it. However, I don't really think there's a lot to say about this game. I'll say two things very, very quickly. Basically, it's Tetris, but using dominoes. So instead of making a complete line, you just have to match the dots on the dominoes, those dominoes disappear, and if you stack the dominoes all the way to the top, then that's it, game over, you're dead. As with Tetris, it gets quicker the longer you go on, so there's not really any skill level, is it? I heard someone talking about Tetris recently. I think it was UK Mike from the Retro Gaming Roundup podcast, and he said the thing about Tetris is there's only one level and it just keeps getting harder. Now, I mentioned difficulty curves, or have mentioned difficulty curves a few times when I've been talking about games, and Tetris and this game, of course, because it's a Tetris clone, have that same difficulty curve. Instead of a difficulty curve that ramps up and then just stays at a hard level, e.g. Manic Miner, with Tetris, the difficulty curve just keeps going up and up and up and up until you can't play it anymore. And actually, the fun of the game is seeing how far you can get. Now, what I am going to do with this section is use it to talk about something I've already mentioned, the Spectrum Games Bibles. Now, these are a series of books that, if you haven't heard of, I think they're well worth having a look at. The editors were two guys named Paul Jones and Michael Fraser, and they're a series of books where there are fan reviews of games all the way back from the early days of the Spectrum. I think they start at 1982 and go all the way up to 2000 and X. So the first book goes from 82 to 2004, the second book from 85 to 86, then 87 to 88, 89 to 90, 91 to 93, which was really the ending years of the Spectrum, and then finally 1994 to 2000 and X. And that 1994 to 2000 and X book is actually all the homebrew games that were done up until when the book was published. And by the way, you can still buy these. If you go to lulu.com, you'll actually, and search for the Spectrum Games Bible, you'll find these books, and they're well worth getting. If you haven't had them, they're really, really good. I personally got a bit bogged down with some of the 80 ones, the 89 to 90 and the 91 to 93. I wasn't really playing Spectrum games at that point, and found I hadn't played many of the games. Now, they're really good read, and what I found with those books is I found loads of games that I'd never played before that were really worth going to the world of Spectrum and downloading. And in particular, in that homebrew section, the 94 to 2000 X book, it had some brilliant games that I'd never played before, and Dominatrix was one of them. Now, those books come in two versions. There's a paperback version, or I think there's a hardback full colour version. The full colour versions are incredibly expensive, and what I think Lulu Books does is it actually prints the books and binds them on demand. And for some reason, doing that with full colour versions must be much, much more expensive than doing it with the black and white version. I've got the black and white version. If you're buying them as a present, I guess for someone really, really special, you might buy the full colour version. Really, the pictures aren't that important. I think it's the words that are important. But anyway, enough about them. What I did say is I was going to say two things about Dominatrix. So I've said the one thing, which is the Tetris clone. The other thing is it is an incredibly addictive game. I know Tetris is addictive, and if you're a Tetris fan, you either will like this because it's similar or hate it because it's not quite Tetris. But either way, or if you're not even a Tetris fan, I would recommend that you download this game and give it a whirl. It is absolutely fantastic, really addictive. I found myself wasting hours playing this game. It's another one of those ones that's really good to have on a handheld device, on a Spectrum emulator, but that's it. So this is a Tetris clone for the Spectrum that's very original and well worth playing. So that's my number 73 game, Dominatrix. My number 72 game is Great Britain Limited. Now, this is another game that it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of you haven't heard of. Unlike Dominatrix, it isn't a homebrew game. It wasn't released pretty recently or really, really late in the Spectrum's life cycle. It was actually released really, really early, 1982. So this game was released before I even had a Spectrum, and probably before a lot of people had even had a Spectrum. According to the World of Spectrum website, it was released originally by Hessel Software, and its author was Simon Hessel, so I guess it was released by the guy under his own software label. I think if you go back and you read articles on it and things like that, in the very, very early days of the Spectrum, people were self-publishing. So what they'd actually do is they'd record the tapes themselves, they'd do the cassette inlays themselves, do the drawings themselves, write it all out, type it up on a typewriter most likely, then go off to the library and photocopy 20, say, cassette inlays, cut them out, record the cassettes themselves, as I've said, and put it all together and put adverts in things like Popular Computer Weekly, and when people send checks in, they'd post out their cassette to them. And in the really, really early days of the Spectrum and ZX81, I think that was pretty much the only way you could get software for it. You could get games for it by sending off checks to people. Apparently it was re-released by Microgen as well, and I'm not quite sure when that happened. They must have picked up the game and given it a proper commercial release, but even then I think it was probably early on in Microgen's life. If you look at the history of Microgen, I'm not going to go into this a lot. I think some of the early games were like this. They were kind of home-brewy feel ones, very bedroom coder games that weren't actually, or well, some of them were. This was very high standard. I really like this game, but a lot of them weren't that high standard. And this game is what I like to call a pure strategy game. To get an idea of what I mean, think of something like Football Manager. And this is all about going through a series of steps within the game and seeing statistics and basically answering questions. Do you want to do X, Y, or Z? So in Football Manager, that's which players you include in the team, whether you want to sell players or buy players. In this game, and I think the name is a big clue, you actually are the government. You're a newly elected government and your objective is to win a new term. You have 5 years to run the economy and win a new term. Now, I think this is the third time in this sequence of 10 games that I've said this, but I've actually reviewed this somewhere else before, so I'm not going to go into detail about the game. However, a few things about the game mechanic. One thing I find really interesting about this game, and I worked out really, really early on, is that to be a successful government, the main thing you've got to do is keep inflation under control. And from the 80s until, 2008, I think that was the main aim of every single government. You tend to find things running away with you, the economy running away with you, and if inflation runs away with you, everything gets really, really expensive and it all goes manic and you get a boom and bust. And actually trying to manage it so that doesn't happen is what you do in this game. Unlike modern governments, so now the Bank of England, you can't actually control interest rates, so you have to do that in other ways. Mainly through taxing to limit people's spending and not giving too much away in things like child benefits, pensions and employment benefit. So actually the real lesson of this game is if you're a government you need to be really, really careful with how you spend money. What I find is the best thing to do is always give exactly on inflation rises to those three things I mentioned, the child benefit, the pensions and the employment benefit. Actually, to limit people's spending, you have to up income tax. And if you want to encourage business, which is where you get a lot of money from, businesses employ people and they generate money through corporation tax, is actually lower corporation tax. That seems to really, really help. But that's just my tactics. I'm sure other people can use other tactics to win this game. One of the things I've said a lot is, if you're just a solid shoot-'em-up fan, you won't like this game and this genre of game. If you enjoyed games like A Rockstar Ate My Hamster and Football Manager, then give this game a go. You might be surprised at how addictive it can be. Now, the most elections I've ever managed to win is 4. As you win progressive elections, it seems to get harder and harder to keep inflation down. To win the later elections, what I always find I have to do is do what governments sometimes seem to do, which is give everyone a nice little sweetener the year before the election, just lower income tax a bit and up child benefit and pensions and unemployment benefit, just to give everyone a bit more money and make everyone feel really happy about how great a government you are. And that seems to be the way to win elections, certainly the later ones, but that gives you a real rock for your back come the first year of your next term and you've got to fight to get inflation under control again. But anyway, enough of the 8-bit economic lessons from myself. That's my number 72 game, Great Britain Limited. My number 71 game is Cyclone. Cyclone was released in 1985 by Vortex Software and was the follow-up to TLL, which stood for Tornado Low Level. I always really liked the look of Tornado low level, and I remember playing it around at a friend's house and finding it incredibly frustrating. It looks great, but flying that plane around is really difficult. And to complete TLL, what you have to do is fly really low over some circles. I can't remember what they are, but there's some circles on the ground that you need to fly low over. Problem is that the landscape in TLL is populated by trees and mountains and telegraph poles, and it is really easy to fly into those. And I think Vortex realised this, because when they brought Cyclone out, they gave you a helicopter, which is much more easily controlled, as it can take off and land vertically, and instead of flying low over circles to complete the game, you've got to collect boxes. Now, I've seen a few reviews of both of the games, and people say it would be much better if you had some offensive weapon in either of those games. I guess Tornado low level is the one where you'd think, yeah, hold on, this is a tornado, it should have guns and rockets and things like that. The helicopter in Cyclone's much more of a pacifist thing, it's on a rescue mission rather than on an offensive mission. But compared to TLL, Cyclone is a lot easier. I think the people of Vortex must have realised that TLL was a bit tough and decided to make the follow-up to it a bit easier. If you can level a criticism at Cyclone, it could be that it's maybe a bit too easy. So to make the game more difficult, there's the Cyclone, of course, which moves around the map randomly. I think it's random. It certainly appears to be randomly. And if you get too close to the Cyclone, then what happens is your helicopter starts spinning around and losing height and you'll crash. And one other obstacle was added to the game to make it a bit difficult. Sometimes when you're flying over the water, you will get a warning of aircraft and you can crash into those aircraft quite easily. Now the game takes place on a series of islands, and you've basically got two views in the game. You have the map view, which shows you where your helicopter is and where all the islands are and where the Cyclone is. And then the flying view, which you see your helicopter and any features that are out there. And sometimes there aren't a lot of features because you'll be over the sea, flying between the islands. And as I mentioned before, really the objective of the game is quite simple. You fly around and have to find boxes. What I do is I fly from one island to the other, have a good look around the island. If there's a landing pad on the island, you can stop and refuel your helicopter. And a tip for anyone who's never played this before, when you start off, your helicopter starts off without any fuel, and it's filled up on the landing pad where you are in the main island. It's very easy to start off and just take off immediately without any fuel and crash instantly. So that's something to watch out for. But yep, if you land on a landing pad at the island, you will fill up with fuel. You can land on any flat ground that you find in the islands as well, which is very useful if the Cyclone's coming near you, because when you landed, you're actually safe. And there are two things you can pick up on the island. There's the boxes, and there are people on the island that you can rescue for extra points. Now, I must admit, I'll be completely honest with you, I never rescue the people, I only ever rescue the boxes. I'm not quite sure what the boxes are for, there's probably some backstory to it. Now, this was a game I came to very late in the Spectrum's life. I didn't get it when it was originally out. Now, I think I either got it given to me on a budget label or on a cover tape of a magazine. And from memory, I'm pretty sure it was on a cover tape of a magazine. So late in the Spectrum's life, around 88, 89, all of the magazines, Sinclair User, Your Sinclair, and Crash, and I was a Crash person, by the way. I'd been getting Crash from issue 7 and just continued nearly to the end of the Spectrum's life, certainly until 89. Those magazines, as the circulation dropped, to try and keep it up, would often have a cover tape on with some back catalogue games from the Spectrum. And I'm pretty sure Cyclone and TLL were two of those that I got. And I remember playing Cyclone. I found it really good and really enjoying it. And I did play it for quite some time. That's one of the reasons that it's on this list. And I still go back to it now. In fact, at some point, I'll probably play Cyclone and complete it and do a walkthrough video. But if you haven't played it, it's a great little game. If you've played TLL and that would put you off this game, please don't be. It's much easier. The one thing you've got to remember is when you're looking at the map, time still moves on. So if you're moving and look at the map, if you keep your finger on thrust, you can keep moving. You can actually navigate through the map. That can be dangerous because one of the islands, I think it's Peak Island, has a tree on top of the peak or a telegraph pole on top of the peak, and you can actually crash into that, so you've got to be slightly careful there. And the other thing, of course, is the aforementioned aeroplanes. When you get warning aeroplanes, they can crash into you. But other than that, if you're navigating between islands, just using the map view is quite useful. Probably the last thing to say about this game is it has an interesting mechanic in that you can switch views, so you have a north view and a south view. Now that's really useful. When you look around an island for the boxes, sometimes you won't be able to see one because it's hidden behind something and you need to flip the view to the opposite view so you can see where the box is. But all in all, it's a fun little game, as I say, maybe a little bit too easy, but a lot easier than TLL, which certainly goes in its favour. So that's my number 71 game, and the final game of this list, Cyclone. So that was my top 100 countdown games, numbers 80 to 71. At 80 we have Bombjack, 79 Saboteur, 78 Albatros, 77 War in Middle-earth, 76 Pentagram, 75 Shadowfire, 74 Turbo Esprit, 73 Dominatrix, 72 Great Britain Limited, and number 71 was Cyclone. So until next time, happy gaming!